Some strategies to overcome the barriers that I mentioned is first, keep rules and directions simple to increase activity time. Have specific locations in the gym for students to travel to in between activities, so that can help lead into a smooth transition into the next activity. Have students help clean up, pick up activities. Start class with an instant activity. Right here on this slide, you can see the board that I use. The students look at the board. It says what to do, and it also shows a picture, so the students can not only read it, but they can visually see what they have to do when they come into the gym. Next, teach students how to wear pedometers correctly along their sides by their hips. Encourage students to wear clothing that pedometers will stay on for. And also, I have extra sneakers in the gym for students to use in case they forget them. And then lastly, have check for understandings to make sure students understand an activity. So you could have the students answer check for understandings like as a class. So asking like yes or no simple questions for them. So the first step of the evaluation plan was to measure minutes that students engage in physical activity. Use a stopwatch for each class. Every activity was timed from start to finish, and then stopped during transitions and instruction time, and then it was started back up again. On this slide, it shows the minutes each class students were engaged in activities. After using the stopwatch for 15 classes, I really learned how much time can be wasted in PE class during transitions. And sometimes I guess I just never realized how long I explained an activity. And I know that's one thing I can work on is trying to really minimize the amount of time it takes to explain an activity and really keep it on simple instructions. Based off of what you see right here, there's only 2 classes that students engage in activities for over 20 minutes, which was on 11-1, where they engaged in 21 minutes, and then on 11-28, which they engaged in 22 minutes. Also on this slide, you can see that the students engaged in overhand throwing and catching activities for 8 lessons, and then they engaged in fitness activities for 7 lessons during the 15 classes. So on this slide is just a chart form of the minutes of activity for each class. Kind of like what I talked about on the previous slide. There's only 2 classes that the students were engaged for more than 20 minutes, which was on 11-1 and then on 11-28. Looking at the lesson on 11-1, the students engaged in a small-sided overhand throwing activity called birthday cake that the students were active for most of the class time. And then on 11-28, the students engaged in a cardio endurance lesson plan where they saw how many laps they could get around the gym, either walking, jogging, or running. And then in that lesson, the students were engaged for 22 minutes. And then on the graph as well, you can see that our low date was on 10-22, which had 13 minutes of physical activity, which really isn't as much as I wanted during that lesson. The main part of the evaluation plan was the pedometers, like I've talked about before. For each class, each of the 15 lessons, the students wore pedometers. And at the end of each class, I recorded their steps by putting it down on a piece of paper. And then afterward, I converted their steps into steps per minute by taking the students' total steps and dividing it by the total minutes of class, which is 40 minutes. On this chart, it shows that the class average steps per minute for each class, and the 2 highest step days were on 11-1 and 11-28, which were also the days that the students were engaged in the most minutes of activity. On 11-1, they had 55 steps per minute, and then on 11-28, they had 52 steps per minute. And then the lowest day was on 10-16, which was 22 steps per minute. When you compare the data that I got from Scrubs in 2005 and a study done on elementary students in grades 3rd through 4th, they averaged 58 to 61 steps per minute, which was for vigorous to moderate to vigorous physical activity for at least 33% of class time. And my highest average was 55 steps per minute, which shows that the students were not engaged in activity even for moderate to vigorous levels of 33% of class time. And my goal was to have the students engaged for moderate to vigorous physical activity for at least 50% of class time. So the data basically shows that my goal wasn't reached. I didn't get students to be active for 50% of class time in moderate to vigorous physical activity levels. And I believe there's a lot of factors that can really relate to why maybe the students didn't reach 50%. The first thing is I noticed at times students weren't wearing pedometers correctly, and I had to correct them. Making sure it was on their side next to their hips, as well as some students being more physically active during activities compared to others, which I see a lot in tag games. Some students are constantly moving during a tag game, and some students kind of stop and go or just kind of walk around. And I think an improvement for my part is that I can encourage students to move around more and really understand the benefits of being active during tag. Another aspect that I took into factor is that my student with the least amount of steps had some classes where they took less than 1,000 steps in the class, which that can really lower the class average. Then the last thing that I factored into it is that when I measured activity time using a stopwatch, it really wasn't an accurate measure of moderate to vigorous physical activity since I only measured how many minutes students were in the activity. I didn't really chart, during the activity, looking around, scanning the class. I only measured up the students are playing tag for 3 minutes, and I stopped the timer, and that was that. I wasn't really being consciously aware of every student and how active they were during it. So the last part of the evaluation process was using a SAM form that you can see right on this slide. It stands for Simple Activity Measurement. I had 3 classes in which the SAM form was used. Like I mentioned before, the athletic director came in one time. The form right there on the slide shows the SAM form that the AD used. And then also I had 2 times where the TA came in from the high school. And basically what the SAM form does is it measures levels of physical activity by scanning the class every minute, and then you record the overall class's level of activity. So like low activity 0 to 3, moderate activity 4 to 7, and then vigorous 8 to 10. So an example of low activity would be sitting or standing, which is a 1 and a 2. And then a 3 is like slow walking or static stretching. And then a 4 is like a brisk walk. A 5 is a fast walk. 6 is like skipping or galloping. A 7 is a light jog. And then an 8 is a medium jog or jump rope. A 9 is a run. And a 10 is a sprint. And the SAM form I got from another study that was done by grad students. They used this form, and basically they determined that the SAM form is an accurate way to measure levels of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So during the evaluation, when my athletic director, Ms. Kilcullen, came in, she only had 12 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity during her lesson using the SAM form. And when the TA came in from the high school, on 11/5, he got 16 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity that he recorded. And then on 11/26, the students engaged in 14 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So basically the conclusion, I learned that I obviously I didn't reach my goal. I only had 2 classes where the students were engaged in activity for 20 minutes. But during those classes, I don't know how accurate the step counting was with the pedometers. I actually found a pedometer, which is on this slide, that actually measures levels of moderate to vigorous physical activity, which is located. You can buy them on gopher.com. They're pretty pricey, so if I did want to get them down the road to kind of do a more accurate measurement of levels of moderate to vigorous physical activity, I'd probably have to get a grant for it. So basically, what I learned is it's a challenge to get the students to be active for 50% of the time. During the courses, I learned that it's important to not just rush over directions to get the students moving, and that it's still important to provide meaningful instruction so that students fully understand the activities and can learn the content. I did learn some strategies, such as having the students walk and talk at the end of the class for check for understanding, which keeps the students moving while engaging in conversations about content in the lesson. I also learned about some instant activities, using those at the beginning of class, which are a great way to help the students to be more active, especially at the beginning. In the past, I used to have students come in and sit down, and I'd take attendance and then go over what we were going to do for the day and then explain the first activity. So students were really sitting for like 5 minutes at the beginning of class. And now, the students come in and they got a quick activity, something to kind of look forward to get them moving. In the future, I will look to continue to look for more ways to increase moderate to vigorous physical activity in my class, as it's a great benefit. It can help the students obviously get 60 minutes of physical activity a day. It also gives them more opportunities to better their skills in class because they're going to have more practice time. And also helps them, understand about the importance of being active and also learning to value physical activity, which is really an ultimate goal as PE teachers, to get students to enjoy physical activity, especially outside of the school day. So if students are having, the time in PE class to be active for a lot of it, and get to practice their skills, then they're going to be more likely to hopefully engage in those activities or similar activities outside of the school day. Lastly, here is just some references. At the beginning, I referenced the CDC, and I also referenced about the Australian study on steps per minute. And then also I referenced shrugs in regards to the fourth and third graders steps per minute. And then I briefly referenced about the SAM, the sample activity measurement tool that I used 3 times. So thank you, and have a good day.